Welcome back to Daily Horror. Tonight, we are peeling back the quiet veil of darkness found in lonely places, warehouses, abandoned buildings, and isolated properties where security guards stand watch through the endless, cold night. This isn't just about shadows or fleeting scares. It's the creeping dread of having nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, with only silence and distance for company. These stories aren't spun from urban legends or internet fiction. They come from real witness accounts, carefully cross-checked against police records and first-hand reports. Men and women who faced the creeping void alone, only to encounter something that shattered their sense of safety forever. If you want to dive deeper into more unexplained files like these, make sure to subscribe because in the darkness, curiosity can be a dangerous companion. And if you've ever worked a lonely night shift or felt eyes watching when no one should be there, share your experience down below. Your story might be the next one we uncover. Now, listen close, because our first account begins with a simple, routine patrol, until the night refused to stay quiet. It started like any other night on the job, but by the end, everything had twisted into something I still can't shake. Back in 2017, I was working as an outdoor security guard at this massive warehouse facility way out in the middle of nowhere, a place so remote, it felt more like a prison than a workplace. The whole complex was surrounded by a tall fence with just two gates, a main one up front where I worked, and a smaller back gate where my partner, Corey, was posted. The warehouse itself sat half a mile off the highway, in the middle of an empty field, nothing but open land for miles. My role was simple. I sat in this cramped little security booth by the main gate, watching for anyone not supposed to be wandering in or out. Occasionally, a delivery truck or an employee would come at odd hours, but for the most part, nights were silent and slow. Corey was at the back gate, and we kept each other company through radios, chatting back and forth to keep the shift from dragging. Rarely did we leave our booths, thanks to the cameras covering the entire perimeter. That night started just like any other. I clocked in at 10 p.m., signed in the few late arrivals, and by midnight everything had gone dead quiet. Nothing unusual. Then, out of nowhere, Corey's voice crackled over the radio. "Did you hear that?" he asked, sounding a bit tense. "I think I just heard someone screaming near the gate." I laughed it off, assuming he was messing with me. No way. If I'd heard something, you'd be the first to know. But his tone was serious, even a little shaky. It wasn't like him to joke around at night. I scanned the camera feeds thoroughly, but there was nothing, no sign of anyone out there. No movement, no noise. 15 minutes later, Corey's voice came through again. This time urgent, calling my name. I grabbed the radio. "What's up?" There was a pause, then he asked, "Do you see that?" I looked outside and finally caught sight of it, a single light bobbing through the field, like someone was waving a flashlight around. It was too far away to make out any details, only that eerie glow swaying through the darkness. He said the light showed up on his feed too, but neither of us could tell who was out there, or why they were wandering around the field at that hour. We kept watching, our eyes glued to the faint flicker, as it moved slowly toward a part of the warehouse grounds, where the cameras barely reached. Beyond that, the light disappeared, and the night returned to stillness. 45 minutes passed without a sound. Then, just after 3 a.m., the radio suddenly clicked on again, nothing but static. I called Corey's name repeatedly, but there was no response. I switched to his cameras at the back gate to see if he was still at his post. He wasn't. Heart pounding, I rewound the security footage back a few minutes. My blood ran cold. Corey had gotten up, walked out through the back gate, and into the empty field. He stood there for a moment, held his radio briefly, then disappeared into the darkness. He never came back. I shouldn't have left my post, but I ran to the back gate, pushed the door open, and stepped out into the cold night. My radio crackled again, but still no words. I shouted Corey's name into the black nothingness, desperately hoping for an answer. Then the light appeared once again, drifting further toward the tree line at the edge of the field. I almost chased after it, almost ran into the abyss, but something inside stopped me. A deep, gut-chilling unease settled in. Instead, I hurried back and called for help, grimly realizing this wasn't just another night shift gone dull. The light flickered, dimmed, and vanished into the shadows. Corey was gone without a trace. Police and company investigators later speculated maybe he'd gotten curious and gone to confront whoever was out there, but it never added up. Corey wouldn't have just left without telling me, especially alone in the middle of nowhere. Whatever drew him out that night was something none of us ever found, and what terrifies me most is thinking I could have been the one disappearing into the dark field that night. That whatever horrible thing took him, it might have taken me too. Maybe it still could. I've worked security for years in all sorts of places, seen strange things before, but nothing as bizarre or unsettling as that night almost 8 years ago. It's the kind of mystery that haunts you, twisting inside your thoughts when the world feels quiet and safe. And here I am, still alive to tell the story, but knowing it could have ended very differently. I still remember the moment I realized that the abandoned store on the edge of town was not empty, because at about 1 in the morning, someone outside started whispering for help through a broken window that I was sure hadn't been there earlier. I was working on the West Coast in a small, aging town where nothing much ever happened until the city pushed me into a new assignment at a place everyone already had bad stories about. It was a huge abandoned retail building sitting at the edge of town, boarded up in some spots, dark in others, and empty for so long that even the weeds around it looked like they had grown up scared of it. For years, the building had been a magnet for break-ins. At first it was just trespassers and kids sneaking in to smoke or drink, but after a while the calls got worse. Strange things started happening around the place, the kind of things people only do when they think nobody is watching. The city tried keeping the interior lights on around the clock, hoping that a lit-up building would keep trouble away. It didn't. Eventually, after a couple of people disappeared in that area, the city brought in the security company I worked for and posted us there to keep watch and make sure nobody else wandered too close. Most nights, I wasn't alone. Darren was the older guard who usually worked the graveyard shift with me, 4 nights out of 5. He was one of those calm, steady guys who seemed like he had already seen every weird thing a security job could throw at him. For the first 3 weeks, nothing happened. We had temporary cameras set up around the outside of the building, and most of the shift was spent sitting in the small monitoring room, staring at grainy feeds and waiting for nothing to happen. Every now and then the motion sensors would go off because some teenagers were creeping up to the lot, probably hoping to scare themselves or prove they were brave. The second they saw the lights, the cameras, and us moving around inside, they'd bolt back into the dark. That was usually the extent of it. We did make rounds inside the building too, but only quick ones. No interior cameras had been installed, so we'd walk through the back hallways and a few empty rooms, checking doors and windows as best we could without wasting too much time. The idea was simple enough. If anyone got inside, the outside cameras should catch it, and the motion detectors might pick it up too. They weren't perfect, but they were all we had. Then one night, around 1:00 a.m., Darren stepped out to relieve himself in the woods behind the building. As soon as he left, one of the motion sensors picked up his movement and sent the usual alert. Nothing unusual there. But maybe 30 seconds later, another alert came through, this time from the front of the building. A man in dark clothes was walking straight up to the front door. I watched him on the monitor as he approached without hesitation. A second later, heavy knocking echoed down the hall from the front entrance. At first, I thought maybe he was with the security company or some city worker who had shown up for a reason I hadn't been told about. He moved too casually for a trespasser. But the longer I watched, the less that made sense. The knocking got louder and more impatient, like whoever was out there had no intention of leaving. Before I could get to the door, I heard the back entrance open. Darren was coming back in. The knocking stopped immediately. When Darren saw me standing in the hall, I told him someone was at the front door. We both hurried back to the monitor room, expecting to catch the guy on camera or hear him still moving around outside. There was nothing. The front area was empty. Darren laughed it off almost instantly and told me I must have been trying to mess with him. I didn't have any proof, and honestly, I wasn't even sure what I had seen, so I let it go. Whoever it was had vanished, and the rest of the night passed without anything else happening. The next 2 shifts I worked with Darren were also quiet, No more knocking, no strange footsteps, nothing beyond the usual occasional motion alert from drunk teenagers wandering too close and then fleeing once they realized someone was there. Then came the night I worked alone. Around 1:00 a.m., the same man returned. I'll admit I had been half dozing in front of the monitors when the alert came through. It's easier to drift when you're by yourself in a dead building in the middle of the night. But the second I saw the figure on the screen, I was fully awake. This time he didn't walk right up and knock. Instead, he moved around the building slowly, like he was looking for another way in. He peered through windows, tested every door handle he could reach, and lingered in the shadows near the side entrances. From inside, I could hear the faint scrape of someone tugging at a door, then the dull bump of a window being pushed from the outside. It went on for a few minutes before he finally gave up and disappeared into the dark. I wrote the incident into the log and figured he was just some idiot checking whether security was still present. It was unsettling, sure, but it still felt like the kind of problem this job came with. Then 2 weeks passed, and nothing else happened. On both my solo shifts and the nights I worked with Darren, the building stayed quiet. The only visitors were the occasional drunk teenagers or people who wandered near the lot and thought better of it once they saw the lights. Then, on one of my days off, my phone rang. It was the security coordinator from the company. The second I answered, I could hear from his tone that something was wrong. He told me there had been an incident involving Darren during the previous night's solo shift. I kept asking what happened, but all I got was a vague, frustrating explanation. Something had gone down at the abandoned store. Darren had left his post immediately and quit on the spot. No notice, no warning, nothing. That made no sense to me. Darren wasn't the type to just walk away from a job without saying anything, especially not after months of working the same place. I tried pressing for details, but the coordinator shut me down every time. So I texted Darren directly, hoping he would at least tell me what happened. He didn't answer. After a couple more messages, he blocked me. That really bothered me. We weren't best friends, but we had worked enough nights together to be on good terms, and this abrupt vanishing act made everything feel wrong. I started wondering whether I even wanted to go back. Still, when my next shift came around, I went. Now the building was mine alone. That first night back, I stayed on edge the entire time. Every sound felt heavier than it should have. Every shadow in the hall seemed longer. I kept thinking about Darren and how strange it was for someone like him to leave so suddenly. But one thing you learn in security is that imagination can be your worst enemy. If you let your mind run wild in a place like that, every creak starts sounding like a footstep. So I forced myself to keep it practical. Maybe Darren hated working alone. Maybe he had finally decided he'd had enough and walked. If something serious had happened, surely the company would have told me, right? I stayed in the monitoring room for a while, then eventually got up to do my interior walkthrough. This time I checked more carefully than before. I opened doors I usually left closed, looked inside every room, and paid attention to details I'd normally ignore. That was when I found something that didn't belong. Near the back entrance, in one of the rooms close to the rear door, a window had been shattered. My stomach sank right away, because I knew that glass hadn't been broken before. The other damaged windows in the building had all been boarded over already. This one looked fresh, like it had been smashed recently, probably during Darren's final shift. Suddenly, the whole situation felt a lot more serious. I stepped closer and looked out into the dark. It was freezing outside, quiet in that unnatural way that makes a place feel watched. The air seemed to press against the glassless opening like the night itself was waiting. Then, from somewhere down the hall, a motion sensor started beeping. Right after that, I heard a sharp crack behind me, like a dry stick snapping under a boot. I turned fast and caught movement outside the broken window. Someone was standing there. They were close enough to be hidden by the wall, far enough back to stay out of full view. I could only make out the lower half of their legs, pale and faintly lit by the temporary lights mounted outside. They didn't move. They just stayed there, perfectly still, like they already knew I had seen them. I stared for what felt like forever. Then the figure started speaking. The voice was soft, broken, and thin, like it was dragging itself through tears. Over and over, In a strained whisper, it kept saying, "Help," and then, "Help me." I have never felt fear hit me that fast in my life. I turned and ran straight back to the monitoring room, grabbed the phone, and called the police while trying to keep my hands from shaking too badly to dial. I told them someone was inside or right outside the building and that I needed help immediately. They said units were on the way. Following procedure, I locked myself in the monitoring room and waited for backup, trying not to imagine that voice still standing just beyond the wall. But a few minutes later, the whispering started again. This time it came from the direction of the broken window, calling to me in that same soft, desperate tone. I could hear it clearly through the hallway, and it made my skin crawl because it sounded closer than it should have. Too close. When the police finally arrived, I practically burst out of the room, explained everything as quickly as I could, and got out of there the moment they took over. By morning, I had already quit. I didn't care enough to find out what was really happening at that building, and honestly, I didn't want to know. Whatever had happened to Darren, I have a feeling it was connected to the same thing that had been calling outside my window. I still don't know who was supposed to take the next shift at that place. I just know I'm relieved it wasn't me for much longer. Picture this. You're alone in a massive mansion, deep in the woods, miles from anyone who could help you. And somewhere in the darkness above, you hear footsteps that shouldn't be there. A few years back, I landed what seemed like the easiest security job imaginable. But this wasn't your standard mall cop situation or corporate building patrol. No, this was something different entirely. I was hired to protect a single family, and not just any family. These people had serious money, the kind of wealth that lets you own a 100-acre estate buried deep in the forest, with this enormous mansion sitting right at its heart like something out of a movie. Here's the thing that struck me as odd from the start. This family had lived on that property for years without any problems whatsoever. No incidents, no concerns, nothing. They'd been perfectly fine out there in their isolated paradise. But then, about a month before they brought me on, something happened. They never told me exactly what went down. Probably figured if they did, I'd turn around and walk away before even starting. But whatever it was, it shook them badly enough that they decided to shell out for round-the-clock security. And I mean serious money. Between me working most nights and another guy covering my days off, they had to be dropping well over $100,000 a year on protection. That's not the kind of expense you take on lightly. Something out there had genuinely terrified them. The first several months rolled by without a hitch. My routine was straightforward enough. I'd arrive at the property around 9 in the evening and stay alert until 5 in the morning. Every hour, I'd do a complete walk around the perimeter of the mansion, checking the grounds, looking for anything out of place. During the time between those patrols, I'd stay inside the house itself, walking through the entire bottom floor, peering out windows, just keeping watch. The family would usually be asleep upstairs in their bedrooms while I was on duty. And honestly, the mansion was so incredibly massive that even on the occasions when they did come downstairs, I barely noticed their presence. What made the job even stranger was that half the time, the family wasn't even home. They'd take these long, extended vacations, sometimes for weeks at a time. So there I'd be, completely alone in this enormous, silent mansion, walking through empty rooms and patrolling through the dark woods by myself. It was definitely creepy in a way, but it was also incredibly easy money. Just me, the house, and the forest. That peaceful routine continued right up until the 1st of May. That's when the family packed up their things and headed out for another one of their lengthy vacations. This one was supposed to last 4 full weeks. The first couple of nights after they left, I settled back into my familiar pattern of having the entire place to myself. Now, I want to make something clear. Even though I was alone in this massive, expensive house, I stayed completely professional. I never kicked back on their fancy sofas, never went snooping through their private rooms, never did anything remotely inappropriate. I was certain they had hidden cameras scattered throughout the place, even though they claimed they didn't. The most I'd allow myself was pulling up a chair near the front windows so I could sit down and relax a bit while still keeping watch. By the time this particular vacation came around, I'd been working for this family for 5 solid months. And in all that time, there hadn't been a single incident. Not one. So I wasn't exactly on high alert anymore. I mean, I was still doing my job properly, and if something came up, I'd handle it. But I wasn't actively worried or expecting trouble. That sense of security was about to change dramatically. One night, somewhere around 2 in the morning, I headed outside for my regular perimeter check around the mansion. The woods were quiet, just like they always were. But as I walked, something shifted inside me. I started getting this uncomfortable gut feeling, that primal instinct that tells you someone's watching you. I immediately stopped moving and just stood there for a moment, completely still, scanning the darkness around me. I wanted whoever might be out there to see that I was aware, that I'd noticed something was off. But I couldn't see anything unusual. After standing there for a bit, I continued my walk around the property. There were no other signs of anyone or anything being out there in the woods with me. It took me about 20 minutes to complete a full, slow circuit around the house. Then I headed back inside, though I still felt unsettled. Normally when the family was away on vacation, I didn't bother going through the entire interior of the mansion and turning on every light. I'd basically just light up the areas near the front and back entrances, the 2 main ways into the house, and leave the rest of the interior dark. But this particular night, it was really getting to me. I kept feeling this overwhelming urge to check over my shoulder, to look back into the house at those dark hallways, stretching into the shadows. About an hour later, one of the landline phones somewhere in the house started ringing. It was definitely strange for anyone to be calling at such a late hour, but I had no idea where that particular phone was located in the massive house, and I also had no real reason to go searching for it. It almost certainly wasn't a call for me. The family had given me a work phone that I kept on me constantly, and they'd call that if they needed to reach me. Besides, after just a few rings, whoever was calling hung up anyway. With only a few hours remaining in my shift, I managed to push through and ignore those uneasy feelings. The following night started off much better. For the first 3 or 4 hours, I felt completely fine. But then, in the middle of the night, while I was sitting in my usual chair near the front window, I heard something behind me. A series of quick, muffled thumps that seemed to resonate through the entire interior of the house. I wanted to say it sounded like footsteps, but the sound was so muffled and echoey that I couldn't be certain. And I had absolutely no idea where to even begin looking to figure out what was making that noise. I got up from my chair and walked into the middle of the first floor where it was dark, and I just waited there for a minute to see if I'd hear it again. I stood there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes when suddenly it happened again, that same sound echoing down the empty hallways. It was definitely coming from above me, either the 2nd or 3rd floor. I made my way to the staircase and climbed up to the main 2nd floor hallway. Once I got up there, I realized pretty quickly that I honestly didn't even know where to begin searching. I had no idea where any of these hallways led or what was behind any of these doors. I'd never been up to the upper floors before. The family's private spaces were off limits to me. I decided to just continue up to the 3rd floor and look down that main hallway. But again, I saw absolutely nothing. So I just went back downstairs and did another complete round of the lower floor. While I was down there, I heard that same sound several more times. The mansion was so enormous and echoey that it was just impossible to pinpoint where the noise was coming from or investigate it properly. And honestly, I really didn't think it was worth worrying about because of how consistent and regular the sound was. I was pretty convinced it was just the house settling, making those normal noises that old buildings make. When the next hour rolled around, I headed back outside to walk the perimeter again. I walked the first section along the house, then moved to the next section, making my way around to the side. This particular side had dense trees growing close to the property, but it also had a small drivable path, sort of a side access route that I believe the family used for their ATVs and recreational vehicles. I walked a little closer to the tree line, just casually looking around for nothing in particular, when I noticed a shape that immediately stood out to me. Deep in the woods, maybe 40 feet from the path, there was something in the darkness that just didn't fit in with all the trees. My eyes could barely make it out in the blackness, so I took a few steps further into the woods to get a better look. It was a car, some old, beat-up vehicle wedged between the trees. It definitely wasn't one that belonged to the family. It was pitch black out there in the forest, so I had to get right up close to it to investigate properly, and I could clearly see the tire tracks on the forest floor. which meant it had to have gotten there recently. There's no way the family wouldn't have noticed it out there during daylight hours if it had been there before they left on vacation. I mean, it was pretty close to the house, definitely close enough to be visible during the day. Nobody was inside the vehicle, and strangely, both license plates had been removed. Someone had deliberately made this car untraceable. I stayed there for a minute, looking at the surrounding trees, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. In that moment, finding something this off, this wrong, it sort of crashed over me just how isolated I really was out there. How far I was from any help, how I could be in serious danger and no one would know. I got extremely uneasy and hurried out of the woods as fast as I could. I sent the family a message as I walked back toward the house, letting them know about the car and asking if they'd seen it before. The instant I walked back inside and closed the door behind me, I heard that same series of thumping sounds directly above me. Now I was genuinely nervous. I felt like I really needed to figure out what the hell I was hearing, so I headed back up to the second floor. I walked down the hallway this time, but everything remained very quiet. There was another section at the end of this hallway that led to more doors. Everything was closed off, and again, I didn't know where any of them led. But then, as I stood there, I heard the sounds again, this time from directly above me. They were so loud now, I was absolutely certain it was footsteps, someone running right above me on the third floor. I quickly ran back to the stairs and sprinted up to the next hallway. I didn't see anything at first, so I took a few careful steps down the hallway. When I got to the middle, I noticed that one of the doors at the end was standing open. I had no idea what that room was, or whether the door had already been opened before. Before walking any closer, I quickly checked my phone to see if the family had responded to my message. They hadn't. Then I walked up to the doorway and carefully peered inside. It was a massive bedroom, possibly the master bedroom, but there was stuff scattered all over the bed. At first, I thought maybe the family had been in a rush while packing and had left the room disorganized. But the more I looked, the more I realized this was much, much worse. Stuff was everywhere, like someone had torn through the room searching for something. Drawers were pulled open, items were strewn across the floor. Before I got a chance to look any further or process what I was seeing, a door suddenly slammed shut on the other end of the hallway, back by the staircase. I quickly left the bedroom and looked back down the hallway, and I could hear footsteps running through the halls below me on the first floor. Multiple sets of footsteps. Now I was genuinely terrified for my life, and I immediately pulled out my phone and dialed 911. I wasn't sure whether I should run or hide or what the hell I should do. So I just stayed where I was while I was on the line with the dispatcher. And I could hear multiple doors opening and slamming shut throughout the house. Footsteps moving rapidly through the hallways. There were at least 3 or 4 people down there. After about a minute, the footsteps and thumping sounds moved through the bottom floor, and then suddenly the entire house went completely silent. I think I waited a full 5 minutes before I carefully headed back downstairs and started looking around. I didn't see anything unusual until I got to the side of the house. Out the window, I could see headlights from that old car I'd found in the woods. The car wasn't really moving though, and after a few minutes, the lights shut off completely. They were stuck out there. Nearly 40 minutes later, police officers finally arrived at the property. I told them everything that had happened and was still desperately trying to get in touch with the family. When the officers searched the grounds, they found the car still wedged between the trees, looking like it had gotten stuck trying to leave and everyone had just abandoned it. But the car had been completely stripped of everything. No registration, no personal items, nothing that could be used to trace it back to its own. The next few days were absolutely crazy with everything that was going on. It turned out the family really didn't have any security cameras at the house, which was completely insane to me, especially after they'd had a previous encounter that scared them enough to hire security guards in the first place. What that previous incident was, I still never got any information about. They wouldn't tell me. And as for what the group that broke into the mansion was looking for, I also have no idea. I can only assume both incidents were somehow connected, but that's just my guess. The family never confirmed anything. Of course, after all of this happened, I quit. I felt like I was being kept in the dark about way too many things, and I wasn't really sure what I'd gotten myself into the middle of by working with this family. And honestly, I was clearly not qualified for what they actually needed. This family needed real, professional security. They needed cameras, multiple armed guards, alarm systems, all that proper equipment. Not just some guy like me to keep lookout and call the police when something goes wrong. Every time I think back on that night, it scares me even more than it did when it was happening. If I had come face to face with that group, anything could have happened to me, and there wouldn't have been anyone around to help. I honestly believe that if I had managed to see even just one of them clearly, if I'd gotten a good look at their faces, they probably wouldn't have just run off like they did. They would have known I could identify them, and they would have had to do something about that. Safe to say, I got incredibly lucky that